palace of the empire stood high above the city, with towers that touched the sky and walls built from shining stone. Inside the great hall, Queen Isabella sat upon her throne. Her crown rested heavy upon her head, but her eyes were sharp and full of fire. Many nobles filled the room, their whispers moving like restless waves. They all bowed when she raised her hand, for her command was law. That day a man walked into the court unlike the others. His name was Daniel. He was not dressed in gold or silk, but in the plain uniform of a soldier. His shoulders carried scars of battles, his hands bore the weight of swords, and his steps echoed with boldness. The nobles looked at him with anger, for no one of his rank had ever stood so close to the queen. But Isabella did not stop him. Her eyes watched every move he made. Daniel walked with calm strength until he reached the steps before her throne. He bowed, but not as low as the nobles wished. His voice was steady as he spoke. He did not flatter her like the others. He told her of the struggles outside the palace walls, of soldiers who fought and bled for her name, of villages that cried for peace. He smiled with quiet defiance, a smile that carried no fear. Slowly, he brushed her arm with the back of his hand. A shiver moved through the room, and the whispers rose louder than ever. No man had dared such boldness before. Many thought Isabella would strike him down at once. Her guards moved their hands to their blades, waiting for her command, yet she did not speak. For the first time in many years, Isabella felt something stir in her chest. Daniel's touch was light, but it was filled with meaning. It was not hunger for power or the greed of nobles. It was something different. She studied him with hard eyes, yet deep within she searched for his intent. Daniel stood still, his hand falling back to his side. He did not bow lower, nor did he plead for forgiveness. Simply held her gaze, steady as stone. In that moment, the queen saw not a soldier, not a common man, but someone who would not break under the weight of her crown. The court waited, tense and breathless, for the storm that would follow. Instead of anger, Isabella gave only silence. The silence was heavier than any command. The nobles looked at one another in shock. To them it was unthinkable. To Daniel, it was a small victory. He turned and walked back with the same calm strength, leaving behind a hall filled with confusion. That night, Isabella sat alone in her chamber. She remembered the smile, the brush of his hand, and the steady look in his eyes. No man had dared to cross her in such a way, and yet he lived. She asked herself why she had spared him. Was it pride or something else she could not name? She touched the place on her arm where he had brushed her, and though no mark remained, the memory burned stronger than any wound. In the darkness of her room, Isabella whispered to herself, not as a queen, but as a woman. She spoke of Daniel's courage, his strange defiance, and the way he had walked away without fear. For the first time, her heart felt uncertain. The queen who ruled with fire had met a soldier who did not bend. In that meeting, something had begun that neither crown nor sword could undo. The next morning, the court still whispered about the scene in the great hall. Many nobles gathered in small groups, their voices sharp with anger. They spoke of Daniel as if he were a shadow that insulted their pride. Some wanted him punished, others wanted him banished. But all agreed that no soldier should ever stand so close to the queen again. Still, Isabella said nothing. She listened, but she did not reveal her thoughts. Her silence troubled them even more. Daniel did not hide after the event. He trained with his soldiers in the open yards, his blade striking against practiced steel, his voice steady as he gave orders. The men under his command respected him deeply, for he had stood beside them in battle many times. He was not a leader who stayed behind walls. He fought with them, bled with them, and carried their weight as his own. When he walked among them, they stood straighter, proud to follow him. His strength did not come from noble birth, but from loyalty and courage. When the queen sent for him, Daniel entered her private chamber without fear. The guards outside looked uneasy, for they remembered the hissed warning from the day before. But Daniel's face showed calm as he stepped into the candlelit room. Isabella stood by the window, Her eyes set upon the horizon. She did not turn at once when he entered. Let the silence grow heavy before she spoke. "You should know," she said, her voice low and even, "that most men would be dead for what you did." Daniel nodded. "I know, and yet you smile," she said, finally turning her gaze to him. "Do you not fear me?" "I fear no woman who hides behind titles," Daniel replied, his words plain but not cruel. "I respect you, but I do not fear you. You carry the crown, but you also carry burdens. I only see both." Her eyes narrowed, but within them a spark glowed. She stepped closer, her gown brushing the floor like waves of shadow. "Speak as if you know me." "I know what it is to stand alone," he said. "I know what it is to face men who only see power, not the person beneath. You may not believe me, but I do not seek your throne. I seek something greater." "And what is that?" she asked. "A kingdom that is not broken by greed," he answered. "A queen who rules not by fear alone, but by the loyalty of her people. You have that within you. I have seen it. But you are surrounded by those who care only for themselves." Her breath caught at his words. No one in her court had dared to speak so plainly. They feared her too much. Yet this soldier, this man with no title, spoke to her as if she were equal to him. It angered her, and yet it pulled at her heart in ways she did not wish to admit. "You should not speak this way," she said. "It will bring you death." "Then let death come," Daniel replied. "But at least I will have spoken truth." For a long time, Isabella stared at him. She searched for weakness in his face, for any sign of lies or hidden hunger. She found none. His eyes were steady, his stance strong, his voice honest. At last she turned away, unable to hold his gaze any longer. "You may go," she said, though her voice was softer now. "Remember, you walk a thin line." Daniel bowed, but not deeply. "I know," he said, and then he left her chambers. When the door closed, Isabella placed her hand upon her chest. Her heart beat fast, too fast for her liking. She clenched her fist, angry at herself for feeling shaken. Yet she could not deny that his words had touched something hidden within her. She had long dreamed of a kingdom united not by fear, but by strength and hope. Daniel's voice had reminded her of that dream. Outside, the nobles sharpened their knives in secret meetings. They saw Daniel as a threat, a soldier who dared to stand against them. But Isabella kept her silence, and in that silence, the bond between her and Daniel began to grow stronger. Even as shadows of danger gathered around them both, the days passed, and whispers in the palace grew darker. Rival kingdoms gathered armies at the borders, preparing for war. Inside the empire, the nobles pushed harder for Queen Isabella to choose a husband from their ranks. They argued that the empire could not stand strong without an alliance through marriage. Isabella resisted. She had no desire to bind herself to men who sought only power. Her refusal turned many of them against her, and secret plots began to rise in the shadows of the court. Daniel sensed the storm before it came. His instincts had been sharpened by years of battle, and he noticed the hidden looks, the sudden silences, the shifting movements of servants who carried secret messages. He did not speak of it at first, for he knew the court would not trust the words of a soldier. Still, he kept watch, and his eyes missed nothing. One evening, as the queen walked through the gardens under the light of the moon, Daniel followed at a distance. The air was cool, the trees whispering in the breeze, but he felt a tension, like the calm before a sword strike. His hand rested on the hilt of his blade as he moved quietly among the shadows. Then he saw them figures creeping behind the queen, their daggers glinting in the moonlight. Without hesitation, Daniel charged forward, his voice cut through the night. "Behind you," he shouted. Queen turned just as the assassins leaped. Daniel's sword flashed, striking down the first attacker. The second swung wildly, but Daniel blocked and forced him back. The third aimed for Isabella, but she moved quickly, lifting a fallen branch as a weapon. Her strike bought just enough time for Daniel to finish the fight. When the last man fell, the garden was filled with the sound of heavy breaths. Isabella stared at Daniel, her eyes wide with both shock and fury. "They dared to strike at me here," she said, her voice shaking with anger. Daniel wiped his blade clean and nodded. "They are not finished," he told her. "This is only the beginning. Someone within these walls has betrayed you." The queen's hands tightened around the branch she still held. Her gaze turned hard as stone. "Then I will find them. And when I do, there will be no mercy." The guards rushed in too late, their faces pale with fear, bowed, ashamed they had failed to protect their queen. Isabella looked past them and focused on Daniel. In that moment, she knew his presence had saved her life. Her heart fought against itself, torn between gratitude and the fear of needing him more than she wished to admit. The next day, rumors spread like fire. Some whispered that Daniel himself had staged the attack to win her trust. Others claimed the nobles were behind it, desperate to remove her and place one of their own on the throne. Isabella sat in her chamber, listening to the storm of voices outside her door. Yet the image of Daniel standing before her, sword drawn to protect her, filled her mind again and again. She summoned him once more. When he entered, she studied him with sharp eyes. "Tell me the truth," she said. "Why did you stay near me that night?" Daniel answered without hesitation, "Because I knew danger was close. And because I could not let you fall. Not while I still draw breath." His words struck her like an arrow. They were simple, but they carried a weight that no courtier's flattery ever could. She felt a warmth she had not allowed herself to feel in years, and it unsettled her deeply. She turned away, hiding her face from him. "Do not think saving me gives you power here," she said. "The nobles already despise you. They will try to break you." "Let them try," Daniel said firmly. "I have faced worse enemies than whispers." She wanted to dismiss him, to send him away, but instead she kept him there longer than she meant to. They spoke of battles, of the suffering of villages, of the weight of the crown and the burden of command. The distance between them grew smaller with every word, though both tried to deny it. Outside, the Empire's enemies prepared their armies. Inside, the court's betrayal grew deeper, but in the heart of the storm, a bond was forming between the queen and the soldier. It was a bond strong enough to challenge crowns and kingdoms, though neither of them yet dared to name it. The drums of war echoed across the land. The rival kingdoms had gathered their forces, and their banners darkened the horizon. Queen Isabella stood upon the walls of her city, her eyes fixed on the enemy lines. The air was heavy with smoke from burning villages, and the cries of her people reached her ears. She clenched her fists, knowing the time for words had ended. Now only steel and fire would decide the fate of her empire. Her generals begged her to remain behind the walls, to rule from safety. But Isabella shook her head. "A queen does not hide while her people bleed," she declared. Her voice carried over the soldiers, filling them with courage. She donned her armor, the weight of it pressing upon her shoulders like the crown itself, yet her steps were steady, and her gaze unbroken. The army cheered, their spirits lifted by the sight of their queen marching beside them. Daniel stood at her side, his armor plain but his presence strong. He did not march behind her like the nobles wished. Arrows blackened the sky, swords rang like bells of death, and the ground shook beneath the charge of horses. Isabella led the front line, her banner flying high, her sword striking true. Daniel fought beside her, cutting down every foe who drew near. The two moved like fire and stone, unyielding and fierce, and their men followed with unbreakable will. Hours passed, and the battle turned. The rival king's forces pushed hard, breaking through the flanks. Chaos filled the field. Amid the storm, Isabella found herself cut off from her guards. Enemies surrounded her, their blades flashing. She raised her sword, but the numbers were too great. For a moment, death seemed close. Then Daniel came. His shield blocked the first strike, his sword drove back the second. He placed himself between Isabella and the enemy, his body a wall of steel. Strike after strike he took, his armor dented, his arm bleeding, yet he did not fall. Isabella fought at his side, her fury burning hotter with every moment. Together, they carved a path through the enemy lines, their bond unspoken but stronger than iron. At last the rival banner fell, their leader struck down. The enemy broke, their soldiers fleeing in panic. The field was won, but at a great cost. The ground was littered with the fallen, and the air heavy with the cries of the wounded. Isabella stood tall, her blade red with battle, her chest rising with pride and sorrow. When she turned, she saw Daniel collapse to one knee. His armor was torn, his face pale from blood loss. She rushed to his side, dropping her sword. "You fool," she whispered, her voice trembling. "You would die for me." Daniel managed a faint smile, even as pain filled his eyes. "I would die for this kingdom," he said, his voice rough. "But most of all, I would die for you." Her heart clenched at his words. She placed her hand upon his cheek, her eyes burning with both anger and fear. "You will not die," she said, "not while I live. You have carried me through this battle. Now I will carry you." The soldiers gathered around, cheering their victory. But they also saw their queen kneeling beside the wounded soldier, her hand upon him, as if he were as precious as her crown. In that moment, the truth was clear to all. The bond between Isabella and Daniel was not that of ruler and subject. It was something greater, something unbreakable. As the sun set over the battlefield, Isabella rose, her arm wrapped around Daniel to keep him steady. The war was not over, for enemies still lingered beyond the borders. The queen had found her strength not only in her crown, but in the man who had stood beside her when all seemed lost. Together, they would face whatever storms still lay ahead. The war had ended, but the echoes of battle still lived in the hearts of the people. The empire stood wounded, yet unbroken. Villages burned by enemies began to rise again, their people working together to rebuild. The soldiers returned home with scars upon their bodies and stories upon their tongues. And at the heart of it all stood Queen Isabella, stronger than before, yet changed by what she had endured. The palace was filled with celebration, but also with unrest. The nobles gathered in the council hall, their voices sharp and bitter. They argued that the queen's closeness with Daniel had gone too far. They whispered that it weakened the crown, that a soldier of low birth should never stand at her side. They demanded she take a husband of noble blood, to strengthen alliances and protect the throne. Their words spread like poison, reaching every corner of the court. Isabella listened as they spoke, her expression calm, though her heart burned with anger. She had heard their demands many times before. But now, after the war, she could no longer stay silent. She rose from her seat, her voice carrying across the chamber with the strength of steel. "You speak of titles," she said. "Speak of bloodlines and gold. But where were your titles when enemies broke through our walls? Where was your gold when the kingdom bled? It was not your crowns that stood between me and death. It was a soldier, a man who gave his blood for his queen and his people." The nobles fell silent, stunned by her words. Isabella's eyes swept across them, unflinching. "I will not marry for power," she continued. "I will not bind myself to greed. If this throne is to endure, it will endure by loyalty, by courage, by truth. And if you cannot accept this, then you are free to leave my court." Her declaration shook the hall. Some nobles bowed their heads in shame, while others left with anger burning in their hearts. But none dared to challenge her directly, for they had seen her lead in battle, and they knew her strength. Later, Isabella walked alone in the gardens, the same gardens where Daniel had once saved her life. She touched the leaves of the trees, her thoughts heavy. She remembered the hissed warning she had once given him, the words meant to drive him back. "Touch me again, and I'll take your blood." Yet he had smiled, he had brushed her arm, and that simple act had changed everything. Daniel soon joined her, walking slowly, still healing from his wounds. His steps were unsteady, but his spirit was unbroken. He bowed his head slightly, not as a subject, but as a man showing respect. "You faced them today," he said. "You stood against all of them, and I will keep standing," Isabella replied. She turned to him, her eyes softer than the world had ever seen. "But I will not stand alone, not anymore." Daniel looked at her, his face unreadable at first. Then a faint smile touched his lips. "The nobles will never accept me," he said. "To them, I am only a soldier." "Then let them rage," Isabella answered. "I do not need their acceptance. I need only truth. And the truth is this: I trust you more than I will ever trust them." For a moment, silence hung between them, heavy but filled with meaning. The queen and the soldier, two lives once so far apart, now bound together by battles and choices. Isabella stepped closer, placing her hand over his. "You brushed my arm once and defied my crown," she said. "I give you my hand, not as your queen, but as the woman who chose you." Daniel's fingers closed around hers, steady and sure. "Then I will never let it go," he said. From that day forward, their bond was no longer hidden. The story spread through villages and cities, told by soldiers and farmers alike. It was not the tale of a queen who ruled by fear, but of a queen who chose loyalty and love over power. It was the tale of a soldier who stood unshaken against crowns and kingdoms, and together they became legend. Generations later, the people would still speak of Queen Isabella and Daniel, the soldier who dared to brush the queen's arm and smile when threatened with death. Their story lived on, a reminder that true strength was not in crowns or swords alone, but in the courage to stand together when the world demanded they stand apart.